At least one more video from Cataloochee in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park here in Haywood County, North Carolina, where I grew up. So I'm up here from our current residence in Southwest Florida on vacation. I am standing at a location where one of the most famous events in Western North Carolina Civil War history took place. This is the spot where George and Henry Grooms and Mitchell Caldwell were shot down by Confederate scouts under the command of Captain Teague. Behind me is what's known variously as Indian Grave Branch and also known as Grooms Boys Branch. I know it's Indian Grave Branch because I've hiked up that hollow and found the Indian grave at the head of it. I've also had this spot pointed out to me by people who know the location. One of those, Raymond Caldwell, remembered seeing the bullet-scarred tree as a boy. So I have no doubt that this is the spot where it happened, just east of Mount Sterling Gap, or as the old-timers called it, Mount Starling Gap. There's nothing remarkable about this location. It's just a spot along the road that leads into the national park, as you can see down the hollow. In later years, Mac Hanna, who lived in Little Cataloochee, actually hand-dug a trail. Now, there was already a trail here, but he widened it, modified it, made it better, coming from his father's house, John Jackson Hanna cabin in Little Cataloochee, straight up this hollow, right on up to the top of the ridge, and intersected with the old Indian path, also known as the Asbury Trail. All of that to say, I have no doubt whatsoever that I'm standing within 10 feet of where that shooting took place. Now, again, let's try to set the context. This was during the Civil War. George and Henry Grooms apparently had been in the Confederate Army, and both had left that army to join the Union Army. And so they were seen by local Confederates as turncoats, and that marked them. And so Confederate Army unit under the command of Captain Teague came after them, found them at home, dragged them from their homes, along with a man named Mitchell Caldwell, who seems apparently to have just been caught up in the unfortunate event by these marauding men who were no doubt drinking. In fact, by their own testimony, they said they were drunk at the time. Now, as far as when it happened, some have said that it was in May of 1865 after the war had ended. I said that myself in a previous video that I shot a few years ago back up at the head of this branch. But it was pointed out to me that there is an official affidavit on file that was made under oath in 1894 by one of the widows of the victims, Louisa Grooms, who had been married to Henry Grooms. Later, she married a Leatherwood. She was testifying because her sister-in-law, Sarah Grooms, was trying to obtain a federal pension based on her husband George's service in the Union Army. And so in support of her application, Louisa was called upon to testify. And she testified under oath at 1894 in Mount Sterling, or Mount Starling, that she said, I set the date down at the time, and it was April the 27th, 1864. I have no doubt that that is the correct date. She had no reason to falsify anything at this point. And if the woman said she wrote it down at the time, that's a lot better records than others who simply recalled it after the war was over. Louisa, in her testimony, talked about her husband's and his brother's Union Army service. Now, among those who tell the story is also Mark Hanna, the son of Mac Hanna. Now, Mac was born in Cataloochee in 1855 and died here. His son Mark was born here, served as a park ranger here for over 30 years, and so he knew something about the history of the place. And he tells it this way: George and Henry Grooms and Mitchell Caldwell were tied up and marched 7 or 8 miles through Mount Starling Gap to a place near Indian Grave Branch, close to the mouth of Little Cataloochee Creek. Again, it's where I'm standing. They were executed by Captain Albert Teague's men, and the bullet-scarred tree stood for many years. As I say, people in my lifetime told me they remembered seeing it. Henry Grooms played Bonaparte's Retreat on his fiddle. Apparently, they made the poor man carry his fiddle through the gap. Now, whether it was Henry or George that played the tune, I'm not going to say for sure, but Mark Hanna says that it was Henry who played Bonaparte's Retreat, and that's the tune that was later called the Grooms tune. I am also told that this fiddle is on display in a museum over in Pigeon Forge, acquired by Dolly Parton. Whether it's the actual fiddle or not, I can't say for sure, but you might want to go see it. Mitchell Sutton, another man who was around at the time, said in later years that George Grooms died cursing Teague scouts while Henry asked to be allowed to pray. It was Henry's wife, Louisa, and a Sutton boy and some others who came much later, well after the shooting, loaded the bodies up, took them to the Sutton Cemetery on the other side of the mountain and buried them there. Daniel Cook, who lived here in the valley, who himself was a Civil War veteran, testified in a newspaper interview in 1904. Maybe testifying's too strong a word. He was interviewed by a newspaper writer, John Preston Arthur, who was operating under a pen name. And Daniel Cook in 1904 said, 2 men named Grooms, brothers, and a man named Mitchell Caldwell were captured in their home on Big Creek and taken back as far as the fork of the road leading one to Mount Starlin Gap, there it is, Starlin, and the other to Little Cataloochee, or rather a quarter of a mile above the fork of these two roads. The Grooms were fiddlers and banjo pickers, and Caldwell could dance a jig famously. Their captors stopped there and made the Grooms fiddle and Caldwell dance. When Caldwell could dance no longer, all 3 were shot and killed. A terrible tragedy. It is further said that Mitchell Caldwell was what they said at the time to be a simple-minded man. And apparently, the would-be executioners didn't like the way he was looking at them. He had a curious smile on his face, and the story has been handed down that the executioners or murderers asked that Caldwell's face be covered before they shoot him. And his face was covered, and the shots rang out, and all 3 were left here dead. John Preston Arthur noted that the men had been drinking. He said, "Thank God no man in his right senses could have done a deed like that." Well, there have been plenty of men who otherwise have been in their right senses who have done worse deeds, but this one was certainly a terrible tragedy. And again, made famous by the book Cold Mountain, which lifted it from its historical place and put it in another location. And then it also made its way into the motion picture by that title. And I've told people, always be careful about getting your history from movies. More history has been distorted and manufactured by movies than has ever been recorded accurately. At any rate, just another story from here in Cataloochee. God bless you.